Hey, what's going on, guys? So, I'm not, nor have I ever been, diagnosed with autism, but I do have certain character traits that reflect being on the spectrum. The big one being hyperfixations and hyperfocusing on a particular subject, and ever since Daredevil dropped in Marvel Rivals, I've been in a weirdly obsessive Daredevil mood. You know, I've been listening to the soundtrack from the 2003 movie, which in hindsight I'm realizing really shaped my musical taste as a kid, for better or worse. I even made a Rivals Daredevil edit to Drowning Pool's Man Without Fear that nobody watched, but that was a lot of fun to make. But just in terms of comics, I don't know, I feel like Daredevil's in a weird place right now. And I've said this before in past videos, but I genuinely feel like Daredevil is the MVP of Marvel Comics in that he's the one character who is consistently good. You know, everyone has peaks and valleys, like Captain America, Iron Man, the X-Men, Spider-Man, definitely Spider-Man. He's like the poster child for peaks and valleys. But Daredevil's pretty consistently good. Well, Shadowland was standing, but I'm going to put an asterisk next to that because Shadowland's technically an event, and the actual Andy Diggle run leading up to Shadowland wasn't that bad. But Shadowland was standing. I think the worst a Daredevil book has ever been was when a creative team goes in a direction where you're like, this isn't my thing, but it's not bad. Like, I recognize the artistry here, so I can't say that it's bad. It's just not to my taste. And I feel like the current run on Daredevil is in that place right now, under Saladin Ahmed. I read the first arc, and I thought it was interesting. Building off of the status quo that Zdarsky left the book under, where you have Father Matt Murdock, and then Saladin Ahmed sort of transitioned Daredevil into being like an exorcist. I thought that was pretty cool and interesting, and I really like seeing Aaron Kuder's art, but it just wasn't hitting me in the way that Zdarsky and Shishido were off the bat hitting me, or Bendis and Malieve were hitting me. Be that as it may, earlier this year, or I guess maybe last year, I don't know, these past couple of months have felt like years to me, but recently, Charles Soule and Steve McNiven put out a 3-issue miniseries called Daredevil: A Cold Day in Hell. It was basically a Dark Knight Returns style miniseries where Daredevil is old and the future sucks, which isn't a bad idea for that kind of character, but it is funny in an Ouroboros kind of way, because Daredevil, as we sort of know him today, starts with Frank Miller and Klaus Janson, who would of course go on to reinvent Batman with The Dark Knight Returns. So reading this felt like staring down a Mobius strip upside down asshole first. And to that point, this didn't read like a Marvel comic to me. And I've spoken about this before, but the DCification of Marvel, not just comics, but like Marvel in general, and how modern Marvel feels like DC Comics Jr., that shit is real. Because traditionally, Marvel Comics is all about the soap opera. It's the life and times and days of our lives of these superheroes. And again, traditionally, their publishing efforts reflected that. It was about the history. It was about the continuity and following the fallout of the decisions made or not made by these characters, compared to DC, where a lot of their more popular and iconic stories tended to be these self-contained epics, where the heroes are these evergreen mythic versions of themselves. And it really feels like Marvel's been trying to take that approach with their universe and their characters for the past few years. And I think Cold Day in Hell is very indicative of that. Not that Daredevil hasn't had epilogues. He has, but they're always within the context of that writer's particular run. So, Born Again, for example, is an epilogue to Frank Miller's run on Daredevil. Just like End of Days, which was, well, honestly, more akin to Miller's Dark Knight Returns in that it's also a flash-forward dystopian future story. But really, it's the finale to Bendis' run and the story that he was telling with Daredevil alongside Alex Maleev. But Cold Day in Hell, at least to my knowledge, isn't that. Granted, of Charles Soule's run on Daredevil, I only read the first, 2 arcs, and then the last arc, The Death of Daredevil, which is honestly a pretty good ending for the character if there was going to be a definitive ending for him. But Cold Day in Hell is different because, more so like Dark Knight Returns, and honestly more so like a DC comic, this is a self-contained story, less about the melodramatic soap opera of Matt Murdock's life and insecurities and the consequences of his actions, and more so Charles Soule and Steve McNiven's grand operatic meta commentary on the state of superheroes and what they've become in a post 9/11 world. And in the same way that The Dark Knight Returns isn't any particular in continuity Batman, he's just this evergreen mythic Batman, or as Grant Morrison likes to say, he's a grizzled 60-year-old Adam West. Here, this is just Daredevil. Not Bendis' Daredevil, not Soule's Daredevil, not MCU Daredevil. It's just Daredevil. And if you have any concept of who or what Daredevil is, you could just pick this up and go with it. Now, as for the story itself, 2 hours into this comic book review, and full spoilers ahead, by the way, I'm just going to talk to you guys like you've already read the book, but apparently the United States for the past few decades has been trapped in this forever war. In fact, the U.S. lost, but is still fighting, and that's tanked the American economy to the point of a Great Depression, and it's a war being fought, at first, largely by the superhero community, most of which, as a result, are long dead. And Soule and McNiven never really delved too much into detail about the war. It's kind of just set dressing, but it's important set dressing. Because in the final issue, there's this conversation about the role of a superhero in juxtaposition of the role of a soldier, where superheroes are symbols of a higher moral authority. They save people, but they don't kill people. But soldiers do. That's the entire point of a soldier. They kill people to win wars, and in war, there is no place for that higher moral authority. The object is to just win at any cost. So framing superheroes as soldiers sort of misses the point of what superheroes are supposed to be, and that ultimately winds up being why Bullseye does what he does throughout the book, because Bullseye is the antagonist of this series. Because in the context of this story, he's the closest thing you have to a Joker figure, in contrast to Daredevil's Batman, essentially. But that's why Bullseye does what he does throughout this book, because there's a plot by the government to bring superheroes back by exposing soldiers to massive amounts of radiation in these controlled experiments, because in the Marvel Universe, everyone gets their powers from radiation. That way, Uncle Sam can build more superheroes and continue this fruitless war. But Bullseye hijacks that radioactive material, and he wants to basically nuke New York City, with the idea being that the fallout will create a new generation of superheroes, just like in the old days, because in a world of super soldiers, there is no moral authority to challenge his Silver Age philosophy of good versus evil. So, the dirty bomb that goes off in Hell's Kitchen in issue 1, that was Bullseye and his crew trying to trigger somebody's superpowers, which they do. They incidentally reactivate Matt's radar sense. But more importantly, they activate this teenage girl who becomes the plot MacGuffin, as she's Bullseye's proof of concept, in that the government's theory actually works and doesn't just kill people. But she also becomes important in that she's basically the face of the future of superheroes, and she's faced with making that choice to either live up to that higher moral standard of being a hero who saves people, or a soldier who kills people, with Daredevil being the angel on her right shoulder and the Punisher being the devil on her left. Now, on paper, I think putting Matt Murdock in the driver's seat behind that narrative works really well, given how the character, from the jump, is a walking contradiction. A blind man who jumps across rooftops, a Catholic who dresses up like the devil, a lawyer who runs around dishing out vigilante justice. It kind of just feels natural to frame the superhero versus super soldier debate around Daredevil. Unfortunately, Charles Soule doesn't really go in that direction with the story, but the idea of Matt Murdock feeling so disgraced that he retires from being a superhero after literally turning a blind eye to the Punisher, who is a soldier, killing the Kingpin, who begs for Matt to save him in his dying moments, I think all that worked really well. Now, in regard to the book being a Dark Knight Returns knockoff, something to note is what Steve McNiven does with the way he portrays Daredevil and Bullseye, because unlike Dark Knight Returns, where Miller and Klaus Janson depict Batman and Superman and the Joker and Catwoman as these larger-than-life, blocky brick house icons, McNiven sort of goes in the opposite direction, where he draws Daredevil and Bullseye like these scraggly-ass old men in tattered, awkward tights, because they're relics of a bygone era in a world that's just moved on from cape shit. Their costumes are vibrant in a world that's murky and greenish-gray, and McNiven's colors do a really good job of highlighting that. And I'm not sure if this was an intentional choice or if McNiven's art style has just shifted over the past couple of years, but this doesn't feel cinematic in the way that Civil War felt cinematic, or Part 2 of the Ultimate Galactus trilogy felt cinematic. The art here feels distinctly flat and pulpy, kind of like he's doing a Klaus Janson impersonation through the lens of his own art style. And again, that feels intentional, given how this is a story that's all about a comic book world that lost all of its comic book wonder. But yeah, it's a good comic. I mean, it's not the epic, mind-blowing, epic, genre-defining, character-redefining, epic prestige. It's not that. It's a good comic, but it's not what I think Marvel was trying to market this as. But again, it's a good Daredevil story. Again, not the most Marvel-y comic on the shelves. In fact, I'd say it's a prime example of those DC Junior Marvel comics, because it's very indicative of that overall tone and style shift that Marvel's been making for the past, honestly, the past decade, really. And it's really been interesting watching that shift happen in real time, and having this be the culmination of that 180-degree turn that Marvel's been slowly but surely making. But what about you guys? What did you think of Daredevil: A Cold Day in Hell? Let me know down below in the comments section. Also, if you like this video, hit the like button, share, support the channel. And if you want to see more content like this, all you have to do is subscribe and hit that bell for notifications when I upload new videos. I am the Mystical Green Beanie. Thank you for watching, and as always, until next time, take care, guys, and happy reading. Peace.